Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting for the Carpinteria Valley Water District to order. Can we have the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The roll call, please, Bob.
Director Holcomb, not here. Director Johnson.
Present.
Director Roberts, not here. Director Balch.
Here.
Director Van Wingerden.
Yes.
3 present with Director Roberts absent and Director Holcomb absent.
Then we go on to item number 3, public forum. Any person may address the board of directors on any matter, business jurisdiction, which is not in the agenda. So I got one speaker slip for item 7B, so we'll get to you when we get there. Then we got approval items. 4A, minutes of the regular board meeting held on October 25th, 2023.
I move to approve.
I second.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Then in roll call, please.
Say Director Holcomb and Roberts are absent. Director Johnson.
Aye.
Director Balch.
Aye.
Director Van Wingerden.
Yes.
Motion carries 3-0-2.
Then we got item number 4B, disbursement report for September 16th, 2023, October 15th, 2023.
I have one question. On page 9, the Open Edge credit card processing fee. I was wondering how that's coming. That's $17,760. That just for 1 month. I don't know if the bill was just for 1 month, but that would be over $200,000 a year expense, which used to be $10,000 a year. You know, credit card fees when someone wants to pay their bill with a credit card, and it's really. It seems like just last year it was $100,000, which was a lot, and I know Norma's been working on it. So I was wondering where we are with that.
Yes, so I've been working with our current processor, Global Payments, and they've proposed to reduce 2 of the fees that would cut these costs in half. And this is without assessing anything to the customers. We're also now looking at our current provider, software provider, Tyler, because they also offer a credit card processing software to allow us to stay with the same vendor. And they were supposed to get me their processing fees this week, and I actually just emailed them today because I haven't received them, so I don't want to sign off on either one until I can have at least one other vendor to compare with so we can move forward. We are hoping to, regardless of which vendor we used, implement the fees to pass on the fees to customers. We were hoping for January, but we want to do some outreach to customers so it doesn't come as a shock. So we're thinking February, and we'll start noticing customers in December and January to let them know that some fees are coming.
Yeah, outreach is a good idea. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, I don't know, twist their ears, pull their nose. I think we've kind of been talking about this for over a year now. And but I know it's not just the providers, although they should be not charging. We should get the best deal there, but also the software. I understand you've kind of gone into that of you know how it can be applied to payments and work into the accounting system and everything.
Yeah, and again, with our current provider, Global Payments, they agreed to cut the cost, but they want us to sign a 2-year agreement, which I'm not comfortable doing yet until I can compare it with other vendors and before we lock into one vendor for the 2-year period. So I hope to have more information for you at our next meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. And you've already done some work with Global Payments because we have them now.
Yes.
Okay, so you kind of know that they're not a pain in the neck. So that's a good start. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, Norma, I got a question. So the 2 bids you got so far, are they above 2% or not, or below 2%?
Above.
Above. Okay, then I got a third party for you. You want to take a look at it? So,
okay.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, disbursement reports. We had a motion.
I move to approve.
A second.
We got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Then a roll call, please.
Director Holcomb and Roberts are absent. Director Johnson.
Aye.
Director Balch.
Aye.
Director Van Wieren.
Yes.
Motion carries 302.
Then we got item number 5, unfinished business, none. I hereby adjourn the meeting of the Carpinteria Valley Water District and then re-adjourn the meeting for the Carpinteria Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Call to order. Item number 2, public forum. Any person may address the board of directors on any matter within its jurisdiction which is not in the agenda. Scott, which item do you want to speak now?
Just a general update I would like to give at this time for the public, in the public forum.
Go for it.
Good evening. My name is Scott Vanderkar, 7017 Shepherd Mesa Road. And just a brief update as to my perspective from the grower community. I thought it might be helpful for those present. And a couple articles and a picture in an article to bring to your attention. I would expect you saw the article by Alan Soicher. It was in the Coastal View, and he is one of our members on the advisory committee. Did a real good job. One of his real focus points in our meetings was recharge and how to get better recharge, maintain recharge into the groundwater basin. And he addresses that. Coincidentally, within a week of that, there was this throwback photo from 1972. Well, 1972, I was a senior at Carpinteria High School. So this is well within my lifetime. And what really strikes me, and I apologize you can't see it, but the district office is about right in the middle of this photo. It's not there yet. And my point being that all that area was open ground ag land, and to the point of Alan's article about recharge. And it just makes me think from a layman's standpoint, because I learned more from Dave this evening in a short discussion, but that we have lost a lot of surface area that was open ground. And one of our points of our discussions in the committee were things about, yes, extraction is important. Recharge is also important. And when you look at the change in the valley floor since 1972, in the last 50, 60 years, there's got to be a significant impact. The other things I wanted to touch on have to do with the charges for property owners. And I just wanted to point out that in 2022, when the $48 per acre fee was in place, I sent in appeals, and of 45 and a half acres, I guesstimated that we had 31.27 acres of developable land. The map information that came out recently with the aerial photos, GIS or whatever, estimating the acreage, mind you, I estimated 31.27. Ours came out at 31.46. I was 0.19 off.
Yeah.
Gives me some confidence that my gut knows farming and knows what I'm doing. In the pursuit of good information with regard to crop water uses, I have been in contact with as many growers as I can be, and with avocados, my guesstimate on both meters and wells was 2 acre-feet per acre in the given year 2021, 22, whenever that was. We had 18 inches of rainfall. My fellow growers came back with 2 acre-feet per acre. Cherimoyas, avocados, lemons about half that. The numbers sent out are significantly higher, 2.63. I sent it off to Ben Faber, the local farm advisor. He came back with 1.93 for that specific time period. And my point really being that I think the groundwater agency has overestimated. I think it's significantly less. I think that will come in to play as being important. Again, my gut telling me that that 30% number that has been used about that the district extracts about 30% of the total groundwater for whatever time period that was. I think if those pumping amounts are 2 acre-feet instead of 2.63 or something, it might change that. It might be that the district is actually extracting rather than 30%, it might be 40% or 45%. I have talked to Bob and others about this idea of these assumptions that we made at the beginning and really trying to suss out the fact part of it and either supporting or correcting those assumptions. And finally, my final comment really is something that I just want to present so you know it, because it's, in my mind, unnerving, just because I do want to build our decisions on facts and good information. And in interviewing some of my grower colleagues, several said, well, maybe we should go with the higher crop use, because if allocations are put in down the road, we'll be up here instead of where we really are. And I get that idea, except for I don't like the idea of building on a fallacy. So I think if honesty can prevail on the GSA side, the water district side, the grower side, we will get to some conclusions that really do hold water. Thank you.
Any comment, Bob? Or?
I appreciate that, Scott. It is a very complex undertaking in terms of making the estimates that we're trying to make. And at this point, we're really just gathering information, and that 2.6 was our first shot out of the cannon, and we're hoping that as we gather information, we'll be able to refine that number. We're also looking at other approaches, and so again, I think it's a matter of time before we get to where you're wanting to be.
Thank you. Then we go on to approval items. 3A, minutes of the meeting of the board held on October 25th, 2023.
I move to approve.
I second.
We got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Then a roll call, please.
Director Holcomb and Roberts are absent. Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Weerden?
Yes.
Motion carries 302.
Then we got item number 3B, disbursement report for September 16th, 2023, October 15th, 2023.
I move to approve.
I second.
We got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Then a roll call, please.
Director Holcomb and Roberts are absent. Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Weerden?
Yes.
Motion carries 302.
Item number 4, unfinished business, none. Item number 5, new business, 5A. Consider presentation on the GSP chapters 5, sustainable management criteria, 6, projects and management actions, and 7, implementation chapters. For information, Bob?
Yeah, you will recall in October, I believe it was October 25th, we went over the first 4 chapters of the GSP, starting with the background and then the administration, the basin setting, which was the big chapter, talked about what the understanding of the basin was, and then the monitoring networks, which is chapter 4. So now we're moving into the final chapters of the GSP. And we again have Dave O'Rourke from GSI, who is on the GSP technical committee, and he will do the presentation for those last chapters. with the goal on the 29th of November that will bring the whole GSP for a decision to adopt. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dave.
Hello, thanks for having me again. I'm going to go through chapters 5 through 7. Let's push through this, Bob. So we're just going to real briefly touch on the Sigma basics again, just to go over the first couple of slides of the last chapter, just to remind you what we're talking about. Then I'm going to go through the review of Chapter 5 is sustainable management criteria, 6 is projects and management actions, and Chapter 7 is the implementation plan. And we're going to talk about the comments that we've received and the schedule for document release. I showed you this slide last time. This kind of just gives you the 10,000-foot view of the entire GSP process, which began in 2021 and will complete in 2024 with the grant closeout and the first annual reports and the beginning of the implementation in the first 5-year implementation period. These are the 6 sustainability indicators. Each one of these needs to be addressed, and I'll be talking about each one of these in turn with the SMCs. Next. These are just some of the acronyms that we use. The big ones are MTs and MOs. MT is minimum threshold. That's the lowest level that we want to see. MOs is a measurable objective. That's sort of more of an aspirational goal. The MTs, there are consequences to not meeting those. MOs is where you want it to be. So the area in between those two numbers is sort of your operational range over the next 20 years. Those are the main ones. Representative monitoring sites are the wells that we select to monitor these criteria. At the last meeting, I showed you the monitoring networks for each of the sustainability indicators. So this is just a quickie diagram just to make the point that all of the measurements of the sustainability indicators are happening at the RMS wells. The MOs and the MTs are measured there, and then projects and management actions affect conditions, but you still measure those at the RMS wells. So I went through 1 through 4 last time. I'm going to go through 5 through 7 here, as I already mentioned. So without further ado. Sustainable management criteria. This is really where the rubber hits the road with this GSP. Chapter 2 was really long. That's administrative. Chapter 3 was really long. Had a lot of information in it, but it was all sort of educational. Chapter 5 is where we actually define the sustainable management criteria. So for each one of those 6 sustainability indicators that I mentioned and showed before with the yellow triangles, we have to define undesirable results and how we defined them, possible causes. And then for minimum thresholds for each one of those 6, we have to, these bullets are things that are mentioned in the legislation, that we have to address. So criteria for establishing the MTs, relationships with other indicators, effects on adjacent basins, that's essentially with Montecito. The impacts on the beneficial users and how we're going to measure the MTs. MOs is the same thing. We have to define it and establish our methodology. Interim milestones are sort of an artificial criteria in this basin because there hasn't been a consistent decline in water levels. They go up and down with the weather patterns, but we do include them, and we'll discuss them briefly. So you can see for each one of these criteria, there's pages and pages of text, but a lot of it is sort of repetitive, but we have to, for each one of the 6 indicators, we have to have text that addresses each one of these things. Okay, MTs and MOs are measured at the wells for each of the 6 indicators, okay? For chronic lowering of water levels and reduction of groundwater storage, they're going to be the exact same criteria. basically because, reduction in storage is measured using water levels. So even though those are two different things in the legislation, they're commonly addressed as with the same criteria, and that's been approved by DWR and many other GSPs already. The seawater intrusion is not defined through water levels. It's defined as an isocontour of chloride in groundwater. Interconnected surface water depletions, we determined that there is no interconnected surface water in this basin, so we're not proposing any SMCs for that. Land subsidence, there hasn't historically been any, but the data collection for that and the SMCs will be determined using the DWR satellite INSAR data. Water quality degradation will be, we'll look at the constituents of most concern in the basin and, and how we establish the criteria. That'll be, they'll be measured by, actual sampling in the basin. So, in Sigma, it's all about undesirable results. You need to define undesirable results and avoid undesirable results. Well, there's nothing fancy or technical about what undesirable results are in this basin. Undesirable results are conditions that would reduce the ability of the district to serve water, or conditions that would result in inadequate supply to support ag operations. If wells are going dry in a significant way. So in order to determine if any undesirable results, had occurred during the recent drought, I interviewed about a dozen different individuals. I interviewed the 7 members of the Groundwater Sustainability Advisory Committee, a couple other of agricultural interests. There was one or two, managers of farms that work with multiple different farms. I talked to a guy from a pump company to see if there had been any, rash of wells going dry and what have you during the recent drought. So again, it's just it's a simple thing. We're trying to avoid undesirable results. The definition of undesirable results is not technical. I mean, this is it. We then approach that by defining minimum thresholds that we don't want to exceed. So we'll talk about this was the one that got the most amount of between this and seawater intrusion. There was a lot of discussion about groundwater level declines and reduction in storage. So, we reviewed the historical water level data at the representative wells that we selected. We said, well, were there undesirable results observed lately? We, had these agricultural rep interviews, and, they had issues during the drought, but, none of their wells went dry. I talked to the driller or the pump company guy. He said he was only aware of one well, that had to be replaced during the drought, and it was something that had been installed back in the 50s. So it was more like it was just an old well, and it wasn't really the drought conditions that made it happen. So basically our approach after a couple of iterations was that we would just identify the recent low water level during the drought and establish that as the minimum threshold. We did consider, going with a water level that was lower than that because, the conversations kind of ran like, well, the farmers made it through the drought. There were no undesirable results, significant and unreasonable results observed. So maybe we can go a little lower, and we did a well impact analysis. What if we go 10 feet lower, 20 feet lower? Ultimately, we backed off of that approach. There was some input from the, the technical advisory committee that, that didn't like the way that sounded, and we thought it would be maybe just sort of a tougher sell in the public to say, yeah, it's okay to go lower. So basically, for the reduction of storage and water level declines, we defined the MT as the recent low water level. And to build in a little bit of conservatism, because if it stops raining again tomorrow and these things drop again, we didn't want to immediately, be in exceedance of these conditions. So we said, okay, if we see these conditions in 3 consecutive measurements, basically bracketing 2 years, then it's serious, and that's going to trigger some action. So.
I'm sorry. Can you identify that again? Okay,
Sure.
we see the MT. You got it on 1 well, or maybe 2 wells, or maybe 3 wells.
Yeah.
So then, do you have to have it be there for a whole year before it can be implemented as an MT, or that's my...
Well, we're saying if it's exceeded 3 measurements in a row, so that's like 2 years. So that's conditions that are a little more severe than what we just experienced. Because I'm going to show you a series of these hydrographs where we pick the MTs and the MOs, and so like I said, we defined the MT, and then we said, if it exceeds that level for 2 years, then we're in essentially unreasonable, undesirable
okay.
conditions
Yeah.
in a third of the 9 wells, as I recall, I think. Yeah, so if the water levels remain low for 2 years in a third of the monitoring level network, then that's going to trigger action. And it could be, I don't know what it is. It'd be projects and management actions that need to be implemented. We'll take it from there. But
The plan is meant to be adaptive, so we don't specifically prescribe an action to a violation. We have a laundry list of actions that we could take, and so we'll determine at the time when we have this exceedance, if we have this exceedance, what to do from that list.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's a little flexible to react anyway, unless it's, just goes crazy, dire low, so. But it's good to know what we're facing. Okay.
I've got a question for you. Can you expand on why the technical team didn't want to adjust that number? I mean, it seems like we're picking a number just because that's the lowest we've ever seen. Like, why we wouldn't analyze that further than...
Well, we did. Like I said, we were looking at going with levels that were lower than that because, in the interviews with the ag reps, nobody reported any significant undesirable effects as we defined them. Nobody had to fallow land. No wells were going dry. Yeah, people had to maybe buy more water than they wanted to from the district or adjust their pumping. But that's not significantly unreasonable actions to take during an extended drought. So we did look at making them lower. We didn't really want to go in where they would be higher because if it rained last year. If we turn around and get another 5 dry years now, we didn't want to be in a state where we would immediately be in exceedance. So we seriously considered making them lower. And there was a fair amount of analysis going into that. We sort of did a well impact analysis where we took all the district's well data, depths of wells, well screens, and we took the 2018 water levels and just said, okay, what if we drop them 10 feet, 20 feet, up to 50 feet? How many wells, would be impacted? How many more wells will the water levels now be in the screen or below the bottom of the water of the well? There were none of those. But so there was a fair amount of thought and analysis put into that. But in the final analysis, it was just, because of some conversations from the advisory committee and the fact that, we'd have to explain it and sell it to the public and say, well, you know, that drought was horrible. You saying we can go worse? I mean, is that a fair characterization?
Saying it simply, we consider deeper than the current 2018 lows, and the GS PAC had a discussion, and they had, some of them had concerns with going that route, and so we backed off and said, okay, we'll do the 2018 lows.
Do you know if we've exceeded that since?
No, we
No, and you'll see it. And to me, it's just makes the message simpler, right? You know, we didn't just look at it and go, "That's it, we're done." You know, we thought about, higher, lower. I'm going to show you all 9 of them. I'll spend a little bit more time on the first one so you can see what we're talking about, because a lot of them have data going back to the 50s. You can see the droughts on all 3 of them. So here we go. Here's one. This is the first one. This is, if you can see the yellow dot in the inset map up there. So this is up in the northwest portion of the basin. Does that start in 1940, that graph?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's 1940 through 2020. So we looked at the recent lows, 2018. They're down there at about 25 feet below sea level. You can see the drought in the 80s and 90s. It didn't get quite that low. And you can see the drought back in the 50s where it was almost that low. Of course, things were a lot different back then. It was 100% groundwater use and no state water. So, this makes the messaging a lot simpler. We'd say, we got through the recent drought. It hit that number. In this case, it looks like it hit it sort of twice or 3 times, but not consecutively. But so that's what we selected. Looking at the hydrograph, looking at the historical data, we proposed that for the minimum threshold. And then the measurable objective, which is that green line up there, we essentially, took a number that was, representative of, conditions prior to the drought. We didn't want to take the highest level, but something that was in the middle there. We didn't do a, rigorous statistical analysis to come up with, 22.37 feet. I'll admit I'm biased toward round numbers, they're easier to discuss. So I just looked at that, that 10 years prior to the onset of the recent drought, picked a number in the middle of, those water levels and said, that's what we're shooting for the measurable objective. So for all 9 of these that I'm discussing, that's the rationale. It's the measurable threshold is based on the recent low during the recent drought, and the MO is based on, average conditions prior to the drought. It's important to note, and you can see in this hydrograph that, in the previous 2 droughts, water levels have recovered, and there's no reason to think they're not going to recover this time. But, it's not, like I said, it's not like the Central Valley where it's just been declining for 50, 60, 70 years. There was some discussion in the GS PAC that, there shouldn't be, because water levels below sea level are what, can contribute to seawater intrusion, that we shouldn't have MOs that are lower than sea level. And that's a fair, that was a fair observation. So, so we don't, but some of the MTs are below sea level, but that's not because it's important to note, that's not where we see it hanging out, over the next 20 years. That's sort of supposed to be the backstop, the lowest we want to allow.
And sea level is 0 on this graph.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I'm gonna. Any questions before I proceed through the rest of these hydrographs? Because I'm not going to discuss them in as much detail, but
Yeah, I'd like to make one point just to confuse everyone even more is, and which Bob knows very well, is during one of these, since I've been with I guess it was before I was on the board, we had one drought that state water didn't help us at all. They had no water, but I have to say the Central Coast Water Authority was always able to get their clause on supplemental water. Then the next one, our bacon was saved by state water. It rained in the north, and it's my memory is the district backed off pumping almost 100%. Just and that was a big effect. And then the last close call we had, the Central Coast Water Authority said, no, there's no state water to be had. We got the last drop last time, and we spent $2 million, right, buying supplemental water when it was available, and then the next year it wasn't available, and then the feds turned off the tap on Lake Kachuma. They did. No, can't have any Kachuma water. Where do we get our water? Well, we had the carryover water. Complicated from the previous year, and that's not even including the time that Kachuma got so low that's why everybody was really concerned. So, yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces, which would be why you might be a little more conservative, but also realistic, and also allowing maybe that 2-year, buffer, like, oh, okay, now we're at MT, so we have to really look at this.
yeah, and that, pumping cutbacks could be part of that approach, but nothing's set yet about, the district will be working overtime if that happens, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I think everybody's working on getting
Yeah.
a better idea of what the reality is, so we can know what.
I understand there's been some revisions of contract terms with Central Coast Water Authority. It's supposed to make it easier to move water around, and is that the case?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Can I ask a question on the hydrograph? So are those brown lines part of the MT, or is it just the dark blue that we're focused on? Like those brown lines that are in exceedance?
Those are different wells. Okay, I'll tell you about those. Those are other wells that are in this section, and we included them originally to show that the well that we selected was representative of other wells. So those are not used to define the MTs because those are not the RMS wells. But they're included to show that the RMS well is behaving like the other wells in that section, so that it's
So
they are
1904 is
representative.
like the primary. Thanks.
Okay. So we're sort of moving, northwest to southeast along the northern edge, and then we're going to sort of circle back along the south. But again, this is the same thing. You see the other wells, that had data prior to the RMS well we selected. You see the recent lows that define the MT, and you see where we selected the MO. Next. So there we are, moving a little farther to the east. This is a district well, I believe, and same thing with the MT is defined as the recent low. The MO is an average water level prior to the drought. Okay, same thing. You can see that the MT is the recent low, and that is in this area it was significantly lower than the 90s drought, and the MO is just average water level from prior to the drought. So again, there's 9 of these. I'm not going to dwell on them. I just want to, show them all to you so you can see what the data look like. Here we're way up in the hills, very close to the edge of the basin. That black line up the top is ground level. So, we're looking at like a couple of 100 feet, below ground surface here. So again, the MT is the recent low. The MO is where it was before. Now where are we here? Now we're doubling back toward the west. Same thing. I just keep repeating the same thing here. But these are the MTs and the MOs for this hydrograph. I believe this is a district well. This is the high school well, right? I'm not sure, but it's one of the RMS wells. We don't have the common names on here, but so I keep forgetting what the numbers are. MT and MO based on the period of record. Next. Okay, now we're getting over near closer to the near where the Sentinel wells are. MT based on the recent lows, MOs based on the conditions prior to that. This one is down south of the Rincon Fault, and I don't know if you recall from last time, but I mentioned there's a fault there that sort of separates that area from the rest of the basin. There's not really a lot of data in that area, and in fact, if you look at those other lines that are not the heavy lines, those are the only other two wells with data that we had. They only went through about 2,000, so I mean we didn't have much to work with except for this one. There definitely needs to be a little more information gathered in this area, but we stuck with the same methodology. We said, well, we picked the MO based on the recent low and the MT from prior to that. Okay. So
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Not to dwell on it too much. So, like, when we have historical data from the 50s on that one that had a pretty significant drop, is it just because we don't know for sure if there was no undesirables? Or?
Well, the main reason we didn't, we talked about using those. It'd be a reasonable thing to discuss, right? I mean, say they were low here before, and life proceeded apace. But land use was just so different then. The city was a lot smaller. There was a lot more ag. There was no other water sources. I mean, it was 100% groundwater use. So, recognizing the fact that, just the land use and the historical conditions have changed significantly in the intervening, 70 years, we didn't think that it would be a tougher sell to DWR to say, yeah, we're going to go with the way it was in the 50s, right, because things have changed so much.
Thanks.
They haven't changed so much since 2018. So, okay, I believe I showed you this one last meeting, but the seawater intrusion. We separated the water level MTs from the seawater ones. The seawater, by the statute in Sigma, you have to define it as a chloride isocontour. So we define the location of the line as, we picked all the active wells that we could identify in the district's database, and we drew a line between them. And then for the value, we chose the MCL for chloride in drinking water is 250. And again, we're going to be measuring it at wells that are currently being used. There are a couple of wells. Well, the Sentinel wells, for example, they are closer to the coast. They're not along that line. And in the C zone, in the lowest zone of the Sentinel wells, we've seen some increase in chlorides. But that's sort of a frontier outpost, for gathering data. We don't want to define the SMC at those monitoring wells because the water's, there's no groundwater being used there. But we have the one Sentinel well cluster, as I'll discuss in a few minutes. There's likely to be new ones installed along the coast. So I guess it's also worth mentioning there's a fair amount of there's a big data gap in that area up there. There's the kind of data that they got from the Sentinel wells, it's not really available in some of those ag wells up there. There's not a long history of water quality data, so there's got to be more data collected up there, and that's going to be one of the primary proposed projects. But as Ms. Johnson pointed out last meeting, that line it's not defined by current data. We don't have points, on both sides of that line that define that 250 milligrams per liter. That's a goal. Certainly in the next 5 years, there will be more data collected that will define that. I guess the last thing to say is that some of these monitoring wells that we've selected, they're not set in stone yet, because we haven't, the district has not gotten signed agreements with all of these well owners to participate. And we'll refine this figure, before we go to final press with the GSP to reflect the latest, conversations and agreements that have been signed for the monitoring wells up there. So that's the seawater intrusion sustainable management criteria. Any more questions on that one? Okay. For water quality degradation, again, I showed you the monitoring network last meeting. Basically, we selected arsenic and nitrate as constituents, significant constituents, because they have primary maximum contaminant levels for drinking water, determined by federal statute, and chemicals that have primary MCLs are ones that have public health impacts. So, arsenic can impact public health. Nitrate certainly can impact public health. So the 5 wells that the district owns, those are basically the well network for these constituents. And the MT is set at the federal criteria for the primary MCL. It's 10 parts per billion for arsenic and 10 parts per million for nitrate. And then the ones on the bottom there, TDS, chloride, and boron, those are more of concern for the agricultural users. So we selected 6 other wells that are not district wells, and we identified, we selected the MTs for TDS based on the secondary MCL, which is 1,000. Chloride, we selected 142 because that's in the basin plan as a basin objective for this basin. And they have various levels, and this was the no problem level for agriculture as documented in the basin plan. Boron, we picked 0.75 milligrams per liter. The boron basin objective, it varies, as you go up and down the coast here. There's really those regional board basin plans, they don't give a whole lot of rationale as to how they selected their criteria. But 0.75 is used in some of the other basins along the coast. It's not specifically the one that's identified here for Carpinteria, but because of the CAP project coming in, the boron in the CAP project is something like 0.55, 0.6. It was, this is a safe one to use. We felt we didn't want to make it so low that we were in trouble immediately. So there's data presented in figures on like the highest water quality parameters measured for all of these in the since 2015. And for your information, there's never been any arsenic, identified in this basin and that we could find. It was just, but we included it because it's got a primary MCL. Okay, and then again, just to remind you, in my opinion, these water quality SMCs, it's largely a monitoring exercise. What is intended, what is written in Sigma is that your groundwater management can't be the cause of degradation of water quality. With these things, the distribution is so diffuse on all of these things that the classic case of what you wouldn't want to do is if you had like a contaminant plume of perchlorate or something like that. You wouldn't want to put a well field down gradient. So we're not doing anything like that, but just to remind you that, I see this as largely a monitoring exercise, and there's nothing proposed in the basin's management that would degrade water quality. But we'll be keeping an eye on it in the annual reports. Land subsidence, again.
Could I ask one
yes.
question on that one? So are there, and so we got to keep it straight in our head, I guess, that my first observation might be, we're only testing for 6 things, but this is the groundwater and not the drinking water
That's right.
testing, right? And so these, is it really only 6 things?
No, that's what we're putting in here for Sigma. The district has to run, I think it's every 3 years for your supply wells. They have to do a full suite of every contaminant, volatile organics, semi-volatile, the full, $5,000, laboratory analysis suite. And they do those on all the wells they use for supply. I think every 3 years. I may be wrong about
2
that.
years.
2 years, okay. So that's separate from Sigma. That's required under federal drinking water regulations. This is to keep an eye on things that might be affected by groundwater management. But there are other programs, drinking water programs, that have much longer lists of analytes.
Oh, yeah, okay. And then also the CAP project is having 12 monitoring
We'll be doing
wells, which is going to be more often, especially starting, but,
Yeah,
okay, thank you for explaining that.
sure.
These are also the most common constituents that we see variability within the basin, and we have been monitoring under AB 3030 for all of these and a few more. So it really won't be a change in terms of what we've been sampling and analyzing already.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. I mean, this really doesn't require any extra work over what the district's been doing since 2000. It's just going to be reported to DWR under the Sigma program now. Land subsidence, again. So land subsidence can be caused by, excessive groundwater pumping, as has happened like out by Tulare Lake or in southern San Joaquin Valley. There's none really been historically observed here. There's not going to be any groundwater well measurements used to define sustainable management criteria for subsidence. It'll all be based on the INSAR satellite data that DWR is performing annually. There's an error bar of about a tenth of a foot in just, how they technically do these measurements from space. So the proposed SMC is that as long as there's less than 0.1 foot of subsidence demonstrated in the INSAR data, that's within the error bar, and that is acceptable. If there's more than 0.1 foot, we'll look at it, determine if it's real, and if so, if it's being caused by groundwater management. It seems unlikely in this basin, but it'll have to be addressed each year in the annual report. Okay, we go to projects and management actions. Projects are, loosely defined as, projects that require, major capital investment, construction. Management actions are more things that are a little softer, that are more on the demand side and not necessarily the supply side. These are quickly all the things that are discussed in the plan. The CAP project, you guys are very familiar with. The next most likely project will be the expansion of the Sentinel well network. Right now we've got one, a single point in space with that one cluster. And because seawater intrusion is a reasonable concern in this basin, we want to expand that Sentinel well network. Possibly after that work is done, there might be some discussion about a seawater intrusion barrier project. You know, the scope and design of that project would be entirely dependent on the new data collected from the Sentinel wells. So we discuss a seawater intrusion barrier project, but, you know, we don't go to the detail of design or possible cost because we have just no idea of the number of wells or how deep they might have to be. Aquifer storage and recovery is when you inject water, you know, into a well, treated water. That's previously been studied a couple times in this basin. Recharge enhancement is, like Scott said earlier, anything that could increase the recharge side of the equation instead of just the pumping side of the equation. So it could include, you know, recharge basins where you direct stormwater into the basins so that they can more slowly infiltrate into the groundwater. Possibly on-site retention of individual buildings, and potentially the delining of creeks. You know, back in the 70s, was it Franklin and Gobernador? Anyway, a couple of the creeks were concrete lined for flood control purposes. And Pueblo did do a modeling study about 10 years ago that, you know, estimated that if those creeks were delined, it could result in, you know, something on the order of a couple hundred acre feet per year of extra recharge. And, you know, that's not nothing. That could be significant. There could be other, you know, reasons not to do those projects, you know, from the flood control side. But there's, you know, things are changing. They're taking dams down now these days. I never would have thought of that a few years ago. So these things will be, you know, will be studied. And then the regional infrastructure tie-in, that's the project that funding was just obtained for to tie in with Casitas. And once that's done, you know, a second follow-on to that would be possible conceptual water banking agreements with either Casitas or Montecito. If they've got water that they don't want to lose, then possibly they could wheel it down here and put it in the ground here, take a haircut on it when we send it back. So we divided into tier 1 and tier 2 projects. Tier 1 projects are going to, you know, we think will happen in the first 5 years of Sigma. And CAP is certainly happening. Sentinel well network expansion will almost certainly happen in the first 5 years. So those are tier 1. The tie-in with Casitas, that's also a tier 1. You know, the water banking agreements are not tier 1 because who knows, you know, those will be discussed. But so those 3 projects are, you know, highly likely to happen in the next 5 years. And the rest of them, we call them tier 2. We include them so that if there's funding opportunities later on, we can point to the plan and say, yeah, we've got them in the plan.
Yeah, mind if I just
Yeah.
make a comment on the recharge enhancement? And so, as Scott was saying, you know, we've seen a lot of development over the years essentially cover up that recharge area. But I want to make sure it's clear that the recharge area is really located north of 192. And so a lot of the urban areas that have been developed, actually, that's not a recharge area. Those areas are what we call the confined portion of the basin where there's a clay layer that blocks water from migrating to the deeper aquifer zones. And so really where we're focused on making sure there's not too much covering of recharge areas north of 192.
And I was talking to Scott earlier, and you have like that impermeable area calculation, right? You guys said you guys have done that.
Yeah, that's something that we'll do. We'll develop a baseline current permeable area, and then we'll monitor that over the 5-year reports to make sure it's not declining.
Could I make a point? This is a little off track, but on the map you had of the basin, I remember maps of the Carpinteria Basin that I've looked at, 10 years ago. show a storage unit number 2 going way under the ocean. And I was reading some of the copy in this executive summary, and it said that storage unit number 2 is pretty isolated. It's isolated from 1, so it has no chance of and it's isolated from the ocean because of bedrock, so it has no chance of saltwater intrusion. Only the saltwater quality there, what's there, it's not, it doesn't recharge very well. Not too many people are pumping it. It's bad quality, but I was thinking, as a project maybe, and it's larger than storage unit number 1, the one we use. It's more acre feet, and I don't think it's collapsing. I'm just wondering if that might be a storage area in the future. For
No, it's actually smaller than storage unit number 1.
Smaller?
Yeah.
Quite a bit smaller.
Does it go under the ocean?
No, it's bedrock, so it's essentially a shelf that's lifting, so it's pushed all the sediment that makes up the groundwater basin in storage unit number 1. It's pushed it up, and that's, of course, washed away. So it's thinner than storage unit number 1 on storage unit 2, and it's based with bedrock that's shallower, as well as where the ocean is. It's a contact with bedrock, so there's no opportunity for the ocean to migrate into that basin.
Yeah, and it's bounded on both sides by faults. The Rincon Fault on one side and the Carpinteria Fault on the other. So it doesn't extend out underneath the ocean.
Well, somebody
but
was
stored-
telling
but
me
up-
stories before, because
Well, like up by the Sentinel wells, the sediments do extend out under the ocean.
Yeah.
But not down by.
no, this was just, it wasn't 1, it was 2. Maybe that was an old, out-of-date map. Because I was surprised. I go, what's our fresh, doing under the ocean?
Yeah, if you go back to chapter 3, there's about 6 cross sections, and that'll illustrate, our understanding of it now.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Okay, management actions, again, these are things that might happen, without significant construction or capital investment, the things that we're going to have to do, address some data gaps. We currently have no monitor wells in the Ventura County part of the basin. There's lots of wells where we don't really know the screen information. I mentioned last meeting, there's a couple of areas that might be groundwater dependent ecosystems that we'll need to suss that out over the next 5 years. The GSA needs to nail down its funding mechanisms for ongoing operations. I mean, up to now, the whole GSP has been, grant funded, but those days are over. Municipal pumping redistribution is a possibility where, might reduce pumping in the headquarters well and move it farther away from the ocean, or possibly a new well, if a new well has to get sited, so that the idea being if you move the pumping farther away from the ocean, it'll reduce the incidence of seawater intrusion. Well registration and metering, that's to be discussed. And then water use efficiency programs are just standard brand things that we use to encourage conservation, because, right, it's the cliche, the conserved water is the cheapest water, right, because you're not spending anything new. So I'm going to talk just a little about the CAP project. I know you're quite familiar with it. There was some modeling work done of the CAP project for the GSP. The report, the technical memos are in the appendix of the GSP. But the 3 takeaways are that, the CAP project will maintain water levels above the minimum thresholds in the RMS wells. So their 50-year projections don't show any, exceedance of the MTs for the water levels. It'll have an ancillary benefit against seawater intrusion. They sort of measured it by how much the model is showing coming in from the water in the water budget. So it'll help that. It's not by itself going to protect against seawater intrusion. It's not designed for that, but it will certainly help. And, of course, it'll increase the sustainable yield of the basin by about 1,000 acre feet. So, and again, this one's happening. The funding's in place. It's moving down the line. It's supposed to be producing water in about 2 years, something like that. So that's the primary project that's occurring during the first 5-year period. Sentinel well expansion. I mentioned earlier, right now we've just got the one Sentinel well cluster. That's that yellow target there. So eventually we probably get a linear network of those, and monitor them quarterly, if not continuously, to define the water chemistry along that line, and to keep so we'll be able to observe if there is actually seawater intrusion. You can see the headquarters well there. We want to keep it away from there. So again, the Sentinel well data we got now, that's great, but it's just one point in space. We need a broader array of monitoring wells to keep an eye on that. So seawater barrier would be the next thing. We're not identifying this as a tier 1 project that's going to happen in the next 5 years, because we need, as I mentioned earlier, we need to get more data. But the idea is basically, so the first box is, pre-development. You can see the water level surface. Second box shows, after you've been pumping for a while, you reduce the water levels and you induce seawater intrusion. So, the idea is you put in an injection well between the pumping well and the ocean, and it basically acts as like a barrier to seawater intrusion. This is not a new idea. They've been doing it in LA and Orange County for decades. It's, the concept is well proven, but we didn't want to get into talking about design and costing, because there's so much more data that needs to be gathered in that part of the basin, and it will be gathered as we proceed with the Sentinel network expansion.
I'll also comment, this is somewhere between year 5 and year 20, if it's needed. One of the things that we'll know as we move through time is the CAP project effective enough that it's stopping, from the model's perspective, it shows that it's unlikely to stop, bring water levels high enough to stop seawater intrusion. But in real life, we want to be monitoring that to make a determination of whether, we do see some significant benefit from the CAP, enough to, not have us spend millions of dollars on a project like the barrier projects
that you maybe don't need. So this is just sort of the concept of the red dots are where there would be the expanded Sentinel wells, and the yellow dots are dots on the map where there might be could put injection wells. I gotta say, these are totally conceptual, made up. I don't know whose property that is, but the idea is they'd be, the injection wells would be between the coast and, the district's wells. So it basically builds a little dam to keep seawater from coming inland.
What would we be injecting?
Good question.
what supply
What
you need,
would
or
we, the
What
supply.
would we be injecting there that?
any supply that we can find. So if we could start by just pumping inland and moving it out to the coast. We could partner with other agencies to water bank and use that water to pump or to inject. We could import water and inject. So there are a number of different sources that we could use.
So there must be like a greater benefit than the injection of like if you inject a gallon, you can extract 1.1 gallons. Is that kind of the theory on it?
No, actually it goes the other way. If you inject a gallon, you might get half a gallon back.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you
So
think
there's
of
a
it,
loss.
half of it's going to go to the other side from where you're pumping and extracting water, but it keeps the seawater from coming in. That's the idea.
Thanks.
Okay. Recharge enhancement are, I don't have any slides, but there's 3 categories of them. ASR is a recharge enhancement project. It's been, like I said, it's been looked at here before, could be considered again. Recharge basin to divert stormwater into basins where it can infiltrate, and then delining of the creeks can be looked at. And part of the implementation plan is to, sort of do like a more robust, ranking study of these things to get a cost benefit analysis, see which will give you more bang for your buck. Okay, Chapter 7 is the implementation plan. It's a pretty short one. It just sort of lays out, the vision of the next 5 years and the next 20 years. It includes some cost estimates for ongoing activities, that the GSA will have to keep carrying on. So in the 5-year plan, we're going to have this, project ranking study that I just mentioned. The continued implementation of CAP, Sentinel Well Network expansion is expected to happen in the first 5 years. Those are projects, and then data gaps would be, management actions would be address data gaps, look at metering and well registration, finalize the ongoing GSA funding mechanism, and then, Sigma requires annual reports to, provide the data and document, progress towards sustainability. The 20-year plan, looking farther out, it's got a lot of question marks on it. The seawater intrusion barrier project, possibly some new municipal wells and pumping redistribution associated with those. Always, I know Bob's always looking for grant funding and low-interest loan funding, and the annual reports have to go on through the 20-year plan. So that's what I have.
Any questions?
Any other questions?
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Then we move on to item number 6, Executive Director's Report. None. Item number 7, this meeting is adjourned. Then we re-adjourn the regular meeting of the Carpinteria Valley Water District. Item number 7, new business. 7A, consider CCRF calculation method for information and presentation by Mesa.
Yeah, so we've been working on the capital cost recovery fees. Normally, we update them every year with a method that's been, standard operating procedure. But this year, we started analyzing it because there's a little bit of complexity in terms of the way we've been doing it, especially as our rate structures have kind of been changing. So we decided to relook at it, and we took it to the Rate and Budget Committee and got some feedback from Rate and Budget Committee. And so we're not taking any action tonight, but we're bringing it to you as a item for information, and then we'll bring it back if we feel like we're getting close or we're there for board decision. So with that, I'll have Meso give the presentation on this item.
Hi, everyone. So as Bob mentioned, this is something that we've been talking about for a while now. We've had several committee discussions on this topic, and I think we've talked about it at the board too. So we are building on those previous discussions, and I'm highlighting a couple of questions that are part of the most recent discussions. I'm not recapping every item that we've discussed up to this point, but I think what is sort of the remaining questions that we've had that I've heard most recently. So the first one we're going to talk about is the methodology that we use for the capital cost recovery fee, the CCRF. We have 2 different methods that we're considering, the rates and charges, which is sort of the status quo, what we've been doing, and then the asset valuation method. And I'll go more into what those 2 are and why we're considering one versus the other. The next thing is the question was raised in, I think, our last committee meeting of, do other agencies use a per unit capital cost recovery fee? So our current capital cost recovery fees are by meter size, and we've been considering adding a per unit charge. And the question was raised of, is there precedent for this among other agencies? Is there evidence that other agencies do this? So I'll cover that. And then the last one that we wanted to touch on is, will the per unit CCRF, if we decide to use it, result in any loss of revenue to the district? Obviously, if we have less revenue in one area, that means potentially a higher burden on other customers through other costs. So we want to consider the implications of these changes. So you can go to the next slide, Bob. So the first question we'll consider is just which methodology to use. So that rates and charges first, asset-based. And if you go to the next slide, Bob. So our recommendation here is to use what is called the asset-based methodology. And the reason for that is that it is essentially the industry best practice that we are seeing. It's what the AWWA recommends. And essentially it's looking at what are all of the district's assets, what have we paid into them, and recovering those costs through the capital cost recovery fee. Whereas in comparison, the method that we have been using, the rates and charges method, that is not essentially what is recommended by the AWWA. So it seems like that might be a little outdated now, because for that method, what we do is we look at the actual rates and charges that we charged to customers in the previous year and update our CCRF to include those. So both methods get at what have customers paid into the district and its assets. They're just different ways of getting at those numbers, and it seems like one method, the asset-based method, has a lot more evidence right now as the best practice. So we are recommending switching to that. And if you go to the next slide, Bob, you can see the implications of that. So the way we implement the CCRF is by meter size. So for example, a new development comes and it needs 2 3/4 inch meters. We would charge them 2 of the 3/4 inch meter CCRF. So the column, the second one from the left, is the CCRF with our current method of the rates and charges, and then the third one is the proposed methodology charges. And on the right, you can see the difference. So the smaller meter sizes, we would actually, there would be a decrease in the charge. However, the larger meter sizes can have a significant increase in the charge. And the small unit row, the second one from the top, that's essentially the per unit CCRF. And the way that it works is, especially for the asset-based method, you essentially calculate that per unit number, and then you scale that to each meter size. So that's sort of the basis for all the other charges. Are there any questions about this proposed change?
I guess I'm lost on the small unit, what that is exactly.
Yeah, so the way that the asset-based methodology works is you add up all of your asset costs, and then you add up all of your meter equivalents, they're called. So like a 5/8 inch meter has a meter equivalent of 1, and a 3/4 inch meter, I think, is a meter equivalent of 1.5. And then, the 1 inch meter and the 1.5 inch, they all go up from there. So you end up with like 5,000 meter equivalents, say. And you use that, the total cost and the total meter equivalents, you divide those, and that gives you your base number. So that is the base charge. Here it's almost $11,000, the $10,965. And then you multiply that by those meter equivalents, and that's what you charge by each meter size. So it's just the number that you're using to scale to each meter size. It's essentially a 5/8 inch meter, but we don't have that. So we're using it to represent, like, it'll be high density residences, really.
Thanks.
Yeah, so if you were to multiply 10,965 times 1.5, you get to 16,448.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not even going to get into how they figure the equivalency because you'd go, oh, well, 6 is twice as much as 3. And I don't want to ask that question. But so I just want to make sure I understand. So we're talking about two changes. One is the calculation versus sales assets. And is the other one and it wouldn't affect agriculture, it wouldn't affect single family, but the master meter would be, the other aspect would be to charge per apartment rather than by just the size of the meter that services the condo development.
Yeah.
Is
that's
that right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. That seems fairer, so.
Yeah, and
more
in the, I'll
flexible.
get more into that in the next slides
Okay,
too.
all right,
But
thank you.
yeah, and just to the equivalency point, Shirley, the AWWA defines those meter equivalents, so we didn't come up with them. We just used what the AWWA suggested.
Oh, I thought it had something to do with physics, like a round
It-
2 inch.
Yeah,
It
it
is.
does.
It's meter flow. Yeah.
Okay.
But they define them for us. So, yeah. Okay, you can go ahead. So the next one is the justification for the per dwelling unit charge, as you were just getting to, Shirley. So you can go to the next slide. So when we were talking at the committee meetings, we wanted to make sure that if we were going to implement this per dwelling unit charge, that again, there was evidence that other agencies were doing this, that it seemed like a reasonable thing to do, that we weren't just inventing something new, that there's precedence within the industry. And there's sort of two reasons why this charge is valid. So the first one is that our high density residences have fundamentally different water usage patterns than single family residences. And you can see that in the way that we structure our rates and charges as well. We have a separate charge, for example, for the State Water Project charge than the multi-unit customers have a separate charge than like single-family customers there because of the fact that they use less water generally, which makes sense if you think about them having less landscaping oftentimes. So the first reason is they have different water usage patterns. The second is that other agencies do have capital cost recovery fees that are different for different types of users. So some agencies I looked at many more than just the two listed there, but some have, agricultural, commercial, residential customers have different CCRF. Some have the per dwelling unit charge. Some have both. It seems like everyone does it a little bit differently, but there's definitely evidence that you can scale or adjust your CCRF based on the characteristics of different types of customers. So I think there's definitely a solid rationale for us having this charge and incorporating it going forward, since it's not something we've had in the past. If you go to the next slide, I think I deleted my transition slide. There's supposed to be another green one. So the last question here to consider is, if we use that per dwelling unit charge, is there a revenue impact? And so I looked at this a couple of different ways. And so one way I looked at this is essentially saying, if we took our current meters, our current master meter customers, and we charged them using the per dwelling unit method, and we charged them using the per meter size method, how would those totals compare? Would the per dwelling unit method show a loss of revenue? And so just what I have on the graph here is on the x-axis, you have the meter size. So on the left, that 0.75 is a 3/4 inch meter, and then 1.5, all the way up to 6. So those are our meter sizes. And then on the y-axis, you have dwelling unit counts. So like if you look at the 6-inch meter, you can see we have our 6-inch meters that we currently have between like 111 and like 250 dwelling units. So it's showing you we have 6-inch meters that have dwelling units between those numbers, whereas the 2-inch meter, you can see it has like 11 to 30 dwelling units maybe. So this is just showing you by each meter size roughly how many dwelling units they have. Since this is the basis for those two charges, I wanted to just show that. And then what I found when running the numbers was that they can be equivalent, or it could even be double the revenue from the per dwelling unit method. However, the big caveat with this is that that number is going to skew high because of the way that we used to size meters is now different than the way we would size them for future development. So it's going to skew high if we look retroactively at these historical numbers. But I think that does show us that we're not going to lose revenue. This is one data point saying we're not going to lose revenue if we switch to the CCRF. If we look at the historical numbers, we may even gain revenue, but we're unlikely to lose it. And then if you go to the next slide, another way to look at this is, rather than looking historically, is to instead look at future development. So what I have here is a table with a couple of proposed developments, and then the capital cost recovery fee we could expect from the per dwelling unit charge versus the meter size charge. And a big caveat around this table is that it's intended for the purposes of comparing these two methodologies. For many of these, we don't have enough information at this point to actually know what meter sizes and how many each of these developments need. So this is not intended to say this is the revenue we definitely expect from these developments. It's just it's just a point of comparison for these two methods. And so I ran this with a couple of different numbers. With this example, you can see the per dwelling unit numbers on the left are slightly higher than the meter size numbers on the right by about $600,000 if you look at all four of those developments, meaning that we wouldn't lose, we would actually gain revenue from the per dwelling unit methodology. However, I also ran this with slightly different numbers and they came out basically equal. And then I ran it again and it came out with the meter size slightly higher. So I think that really in practice, we'd expect these two methodologies to be pretty comparable and the revenue to be pretty much the same between them. I think in some instances, the revenue would be higher for one or the other, but over the long term, they would pretty much be equal. And one of the big reasons there is that, one development might have 3-bedroom units and another might have 1-bedroom units. So they're going to be quite variable. And between these 2 points, I don't think there's any concern that this methodology would result in a loss of revenue to the district. I think that is it for the slides. You do have in your packet a document outlining the methodology for the CCRF. There's also 2 documents that'll go in the rules and regulations. One is the resolution on the CCRF, which again talks about the methodology, but then puts it in the context of charging customers and talks about some different exceptions there and some examples. And then there's the Appendix B of the rules and regulations too, which just shows a table with the charges. So you have several different documents if you want more information. And if you have any questions or concerns or points you want me to investigate further, let me know. If not, we plan to bring this back to you for adoption at the next couple meetings. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Shirley.
Yeah, I had a question on the rates and charges versus the assets-based.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me like the assets-based would be, well, you tell me, is either one easier to handle and less squirrely and less variable, or are they the same amount of computations?
In terms of staff effort, they're roughly comparable. I think that the asset method is likely to be less variable over time because one of the problems we've run into with rates and charges method is that we've changed the structure of our rates and charges. And then then we have to base the calculation on slightly different things or reformulate it. So I think the asset valuation method is likely to be less prone to those changes.
Yeah, I can see the advantages there, especially looking back in time. You go like, wait a minute, what was happening here and how did we come to this? And so, if you had to, revisit your history and why and wherefore did you do that. So, okay, well, thank you.
So maybe this is for Bob. Why would this not be analyzed during our budget sessions? I feel like we spent a lot of money and time, and then we're kind of coming back around to...
Normally we do, but we just weren't ready with, we were analyzing this question of method. We thought we would probably be able to do it, closer to when we actually adopted the final budget, but it's taken a little bit more time. We also have, the environment we're working in is we have a lot of high-density developments that are asking for master meters, and so we wanted to consider that as part of the CCRF analysis. So it just took longer this year.
And then do we know, I know we found we saw a couple examples of entities that are doing it. Is that the common practice around locally, or is that just do we have to like hunt for those Camarillo and whatever the other one was?
East Bay Mud.
East Bay Mud.
Yeah.
Yeah, the asset-based method absolutely is, that's what everyone's doing. The rates and charges, some people do it, some people don't.
Thanks.
A question on the high-density units. Even though you might put a bigger meter, we're still going to have individual meters for the smaller units? Which is
The state requires sub-meters, which are privately managed, not by us, behind any master meter. And I'll actually talk about that in the next presentation.
okay.
Yeah, next item.
Okay. And then the other one, when you say asset-based, are we talking about when the equipment was installed, or are we talking about replacement value?
Yeah, so if you, it details it in the methodology document. Essentially, what you do is you look at what year it was installed, and you look at the depreciated value, and there's a construction, it's a CCI acronym. I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but there's like an engineering industry standard where you use a ratio of cost from the year it was built to the current year to adjust that cost to today's dollars. So you take the depreciated value and adjust it to today's dollars, and then use that, I believe. But it's written down in the methodology in case I'm not saying it exactly right.
Okay, no, that's fair.
Yeah, it's the construction cost index
Cost,
that
yeah.
is used.
Got it, okay.
Thank you.
So if there's no more questions, then we're done with item A. And then you'll be here for item B also? Okay, then we go on to item 7B, consider revision to individual meter policy for information and for Bob and Mesa again, but also Justin would like to speak after the presentation.
Yeah, we broke this out to a separate item just to kind of keep the CCRF discussion a little bit cleaner. The CCRF work was driven more by making sure that we had a defensible fee, first of all, and then also, that it was considering the idea of these master meters and these high density developments, but really that was not the driver for the CCRF fee work. So we broke this out to a second item for the purpose of this discussion. So this item will be discussing the policy that regulates whether or not we allow master meters, which we don't currently in the rules and regulations. So with that, go ahead.
Okay. So again, this is something that we've been talking about a lot, and we've had several committee and board meetings on. And so this is the question that we were left with after, I think, our last committee meeting. If you remember, I actually made a proposal to the board a couple of months ago saying under what circumstances we could allow master meters. And then at the committee, we were talking about just taking a step back and saying, should we allow master meters? Are other districts allowing master meters? Does it make sense for us to do that? So consider that question first. And then if we say, yes, we should allow master meters, then we come back to the under what circumstances do we allow master meters? So I'm going to start with this. Should we allow master meters? Since, as Bob said, we currently don't. And if you go to the next slide. So part of the reason why we've had an ongoing discussion here is because there's a lot of things to consider, both when thinking about the district's current customers and its future customers. And there's sort of two different directions that we're being pulled in. So on the top, I have sort of the advantages of individual meters, and then on the bottom, I have the advantages of master meters, and I'll start at the top left and go over and down. So one is the state definitely is moving towards more individualized water management. We see this with the water use efficiency information that we've been working on with the allocations, them having us separate landscape meters out from residential meters. It definitely seems like the state is trending in that direction, and there's a lot of reasons for that, which are essentially the other points on top there. Like you have much better leak detection when you have individual meters. It's already hard for individual customers to find a leak when they have it. In larger developments, it would be much harder to find a leak. Also, it's harder to even identify a leak in the first place because you might have people using water almost all hours of the day. And for a leak to be detected, you need 24 hours of continuous flow, so that might just happen. The next one over is essentially the state does require that if you have a master meter, you must have sub-meters behind it. However, those are privately managed, so as the district, we have no control over, you know, are they actually maintained? Are they working or are they broken? Are the customers getting, are like the individuals in each residence getting any information about their water use from that meter? So we do have customers who are currently master meter customers ask us, could I get more information about my water use? And that's just not available. The last one is price signal to customers. So obviously, we have our rates structured so that if you use excessive amounts of water, you pay higher rates. But you know, customers who maybe aren't seeing their individual water use, that price signal is lost to them. However, those are all very valid reasons to have individual meters. There's also a lot of reasons to consider master meters. So the state is simultaneously pushing for a lot more housing very quickly. And with that housing, we have to think about, you know, is it feasible to plumb individually all of the units? And also, not only is it feasible, but is it efficient to do? We know that housing is very expensive, so as you can see on the right, it might lead to much higher development costs with individual plumbing. Another one is the meters may not fit at the curb line. So there's very real considerations in both directions that we have to think about, which is why we've had many discussions on this, because we want to make sure that we consider them all before we implement a policy. So if you go to the next slide, Bob. So we wanted to look at, do other agencies allow master meters? Not only other water agencies, but also like what is the gas company doing? And so I looked at more than just these, but here's just a couple of examples. So the gas company, when I talked to them, they said essentially they let the local organization decide. So they sort of punt it and say, you can have master meters, which is interesting. The city of Santa Barbara allows master meters, and their rationale is essentially limited space at the curb line. So, you know, they want to accommodate development when they have limited space on the ground. Irvine Ranch Water District does something slightly different. They have townhomes get individual meters, but multi-dwelling unit buildings get master meters. And then Goleta Water District, master meters are the standard for anything that's multi-unit. So essentially, I think the conclusion that we can draw from these is that everyone's allowing master meters to some degree, so it likely makes sense for us to do the same thing. However, the way in which you allow master meters varies, and there's definitely different ways in which you can do that. So if you go to the next slide. So if you remember back at that previous meeting, we had a discussion about under what conditions we would allow master meters. And I went into a lot more detail where I looked at, you know, all of our existing master meters, how many dwelling units are there per meter, what sort of makes sense, and we came to some criteria. And these are not changed from what you saw before. These are the same criteria that we would be proposing. And I believe you have the text there in the rule too, which is the same as we proposed back at that previous meeting. And so essentially what we're saying is that it would make sense to allow master meters where we have a building with more than 10 residential dwelling units. So that could be one building altogether, or it could be shared walls, so like townhomes in a line. If the units in that building are individually parceled, so condos instead of rental units, we would prefer for them to still be individually metered. However, then we come to considerations like, is there space at the curb line, or is there maybe an argument that the development would not be feasible if they were individually metered? So we could then make exceptions to that. This is all at the district's discretion, as it says in the rule, but essentially the takeaway is that we're suggesting if there are more than 10 residential units within a building that it could be eligible for a master meter. And I think that's it. Are there questions on this topic?
Anything to go for? Actually, I got a question. So, put in a master meter, and if you got an unscrupulous landlord, he could upcharge the water, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. Go for it.
The units are individually.
Oh, if you could actually, if the
Sorry.
presentation, if you're done asking questions of Meso, then we can have public come up and.
Do you have any questions for me, Case?
No, go ahead.
I think I might. So is this saying that we're proposing to allow them if there are more than 10 residential units within a building?
Yes, they would get a master meter, or they could if they
They
wanted.
could if they wanted.
Yeah.
And then if they're individually parceled, they could or could not?
We would prefer that they get individually metered. They would have to make a valid argument. They would have to make an argument that we felt was valid as to why they should get a master meter.
Right, like curb space or something. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I guess, like, because we prohibit the sale of water within the district, right? So
Resale, yeah.
So would you have to get like a variance on that, or would it just be?
No, so that's kind of the reason why when we're parcelized, we assume there are going to be different owners of each unit, and therefore we would prefer to have meters for each one of those to tie them to the customer. And of course, if they don't pay, then they're responsible.
Are there any pending projects that have a curb space limitation that you have gotten that far into the development?
We haven't
with?
gotten that far, no.
Okay, thanks.
Shirley?
And of course, the ADU, I just thought of something, they're exempt from this, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Justin, if you want to identify yourself, please.
She did all my work for me. I don't have to really do anything at this point. Hello, I'm Justin Klentner. I live at 3344 Foothill. I also own the property at 4745 Carpinteria Avenue. The state is mandating that we bring in high-density housing because we're short about 901 units in Carpinteria. So to do that, the idea is to do urban infill, not to use any ag property or not to do any of those ideas. My current project here has 24 apartments, and to put 24 individual meters is exactly what I think, was that my project, the Carpinteria one that you had up there? You can see that the cost to me is almost exactly the same. I think one was 197 and one was 200. So it's not that I'm saving any money one way or the other. I'm just trying to look at this as I've been a builder for 30 plus years, and the practicality of bringing 27 meters, 30 meters to a property like this is just not practical. The plumbing alone, you're waiting for 30 units to something to break. So I just wanted to come and validate basically all of those points. And everywhere that I've worked and everywhere that I put in these multifamily units, this is the way that it's done. It's sort of the standard industry right now. I know that Carpinteria hasn't been there yet, but we are now. And so I just want to make sure that we're catching up to kind of a practical resource of everybody's time. The installation, if you look at Public Works, the installation of 27, 30 meters is very, very tricky, right? And that's just on this parcel. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, but what happens if somebody wants to do a project that has 100 studio apartments? How are we going to put 100 individual units, individual meters there? It's not practical, and I know it's just something that we haven't had to come across. But the mandate, I think, or not the ordinance. What's the every individual unit has to have a meter? Is the bylaws? Is it that?
No, it's a state law.
No. That part I know, the state law, but I meant, and to answer your question earlier, each unit still has an individual meter. So the water district still, the amount of water that goes is still regulated by you. Then if the unscrupulous landlord like me charges extra, I can't, because the meters that are in the individual apartments, they're done by a third party. They have to be there, and they have to be monitored by and billed by a third party. We don't get to do that. So that base is covered. But the volume obviously goes through the master meter, and that you all are in control of. So, and I just want to talk about being, again, 30 meters, 30 water heaters, 30 everything, when you can have one boiler, and it's just like a lot of, the moving parts are a lot easier to deal with, and it's easier for the water district to install. It's easier for us to maintain. It's just easier the whole way through, and it just makes more practical sense for everybody. So I was very happy that she was ahead of me, but all those things are accurate of what she said. It's not like I'm coming here going, okay, well, doing it this way will cost me $400,000, and I want to do it a way that's going to cost me $2. I'm actually going to do it a way that's going to cost me $3,000 more, according to that chart.
Yeah, I'll remind you that those are not real numbers.
No, I know. I got you, but I'm saying, but they're probably pretty close, right? And so she seemed very smart. So, so I think that's all I wanted to say. I don't know if you have any building questions or any of those things of why the curb is a real reality. Again, if you just take the 30 meters times what are they? They're like 12 by 18. That's 30 feet long. So you have to have a stretch that you have that space for. Then you got to be able to fit the plumbing into 30 different plumbing lines into 30 feet. It just from a realistic builder standpoint, it's not practical. That's
Casey?
pretty much all I had.
A question for you, just the water heater or boiler kind of aspect is interesting. So how would you meter that on an individual basis?
The hot water line and the cold water line both get metered by a third-party meter. So the water goes through that, whatever water goes through that unit. You just need one water heater instead of having 27.
Sure, so you need 2 meters per unit?
Yes.
And this is for Bob maybe, is that a requirement of the state that it's a third party that handles all that? Do we know that?
It is.
I don't know. Maybe Meso knows.
I'm not sure.
It is. And there's only 3 or 4 companies that are, what's the word I'm looking for, certified to do it.
We can research that if you'd like us to.
And of course, the mobile homes would be exempt.
I think what she was saying I think anyone that's got their own
The
parcel.
landlord can still gouge them on their water.
Yeah, that I don't know. And I also do know that like all the condos that you have a separate APN number and all of those things, you definitely have it. I think you would prefer to have a separate meter because you don't want to, it's your own property and you're trying to deal with that. But it's just this high density gets really tricky.
And so the main economics is not the capital improvement charges, because they're the same either way, but it is the logistics of the
The
installation,
practicality.
cost of the meters, which is
Right.
all right.
You get any questions? Okay, then so just curious, if it's already a state requirement that both hot and cold are being monitored, are those electronic meters now, or are they?
Yeah, they're electronic and they're read by kind of like how your power is now. They they walk down the street and they pick it up and via Wi-Fi or however they do that.
And then also you said as far as an unscrupulous landlord taking advantage of his tenants is not possible then?
It's not. He doesn't get to do the billing. The billing's done by a third party also. The third party meter, and it's done by a third party that does the billing.
All right. Sounds good to me. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess to follow up, Bob, I would be interested to know about what the regulation
Yeah.
is on
We'll bring that back
meter service, and
next
then,
time.
I guess the specifics on that.
Okay.
Okay, then we move on to item number 7C. Consider adoption of ordinance number 23-2, approving the allocation method for action. Bob.
Yeah, you'll remember 2 weeks ago we had a presentation on the allocation methodology, and we had a public hearing. We're planning to adopt a resolution, but legal counsel informed us that we wanted to probably do that by ordinance, so we're back with basically the same resolution, but in ordinance form for your consideration.
And the three of us are qualified to do this, Bob? No, I'm just,
We
I know, sorry.
have a quorum, yeah, and I think the other directors are informed about it, and I think they were ready to, at least my opinion was they were ready to adopt 2 weeks ago.
So can we make a motion?
go, yeah,
Yeah,
please.
I would like to move to adopt the ordinance for the allocation number 23-2.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Then we need a roll call, please.
Director Holcomb and Roberts are absent. Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Sorry. Director Van Wingerden?
Yes.
Motion carries 3-0-2.
Then we move on to item number 7D. Consider resolution number 1151, closing of districts, the Carpinteria Ground Sustainability Agency checking account. Bob?
Yeah, this is a sort of a housekeeping item. We when we were first forming the GSA, before the GSA bylaws were complete, the GSA needed a bank account. So the water district opened a bank account on behalf of the GSA, and so this is that bank account. And now the GSA has its own bank accounts, and so we needed a resolution to close this bank account with the bank, and so that's what this is all about.
I move we approve resolution 1151.
I second.
We got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? The roll call, please.
Director Holcomb and Director Roberts are absent. Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Balch?
Aye.
Director Van Wingerden?
Yes.
Motion carries 3-0-2.
Then we got item number 7E. Consider CAP project potholing bids for action. Bob?
Yeah, so this map didn't come out quite as easy to see as I had hoped. We're, as you know, in the midst of the design for the CAP project, and one of the elements of the CAP project is a pipeline that goes from where the AWPF will be located at the Carpinteria Sanitary District. That pipeline will migrate through town down 6th, and I believe it's up Ash, and then a small portion of Carp Ave, and then up Eugenia, and then eventually over to Linden. And there are a lot of utilities in that corridor. We've identified them by doing paper research, but that only gets you so far when you're doing a design. You want to know actually where those, how deep and where those are located, so that when you do prepare the plans, you don't have a bunch of change orders that are associated with, going around all of these utilities. To that end, the design team identified the locations where the potential crossings would be, and requested that the district hire a contractor to do potholes along those locations to positively identify all those utilities. We did that, and there were 39 locations to be potholed, and we sent out an RFP directly to 5 local contractors and advertised on the district website. We only received 2 bids, one from Elite Engineer and one from TR Contractors. Bids came in, and we do this by per pothole. Came in at $7,642 per pothole, which came out to be $193,760, and the second bid was quite a bit lower from Tierra, $49.68 per pothole, which came out to be, I guess that's inversed. Yeah, the total is $193 for the second one and $298 for the first one. The probable engineering cost estimate was about $3,000 per pothole, which is quite a bit lower than even the lower bid. And there was some investigation as to why that was. Contractors were contacted and questioned about, what was it that was making these potholes so expensive. And there were a few things that we identified, and I think at this point, we believe that it would be better to reject all bids and rebid with slight variations to the specs so that we can expect the cost to go down. And so that's what we're proposing and recommending. And so the action today would be reject all bids and rebid with modifications.
I move to reject all bids and rebid with modifications.
I have a question. Is this like normal to run any pipe anywhere to pothole? Actually, I guess you you have a look-see anywhere there might be something else crossing your pipe. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that normal procedure?
Yeah. So when you do a pipeline design, one of the things that you do is you study the existing utility maps. You determine where there's going to be crossings or potential conflicts. Then you make a decision about the risk associated with those crossings. If it's a shorter pipeline, then you may decide, you know what, we'll just let the contractor find it, and if they change order during the contract, charge us more typically to get around a pipe. For example, you might have your pipeline alignment may come along, and then you might have a crossing, and you might run right into it according to the design. So at that point, the contractor would say, do you want us to build a vertical offset around that pipe? And we would say yes, and then they would say, well, that's going to cost you $5,000 more. And the problem with having 39 of those situations is that can escalate the cost of the work quite a bit compared to going out to bid for potholing and verifying and making sure you don't have those conflicts. So that's why the 3,000 we did the analysis and said around $3,000 per pothole. That gets you somewhere around 170,000, I think. It's likely that if you didn't do this, the change orders would exceed that 170,000 during construction. So it seemed to make sense to go ahead and do it.
Okay, that seems like a lot of possible crossings. And so if they do the pothole, then they will have, in other words, the drawing, it may be 5 inches off or something, and they'll give you the actual elevation and left and right and up and down
Yep,
on it.
yep.
So then you can plan the whole line.
Exactly. So we actually will have a surveyor following these contractors, and the way they pothole it is they have a big vacuum cleaner, essentially a vacuum suction, and they cut a hole in the pavement if it's in the pavement, and then they just suck the material out until they hit it. And so once they hit it, they call the surveyor. The surveyor comes in and puts a survey rod on top of the pipe and says, top of pipe, is here, and the depth is, or the elevation is here, and then they'll note the
So
size of the pipe.
does that include the surveying work and all the numbers and calculations as well?
No,
or just digging a hole?
No, that's just digging the hole.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're taking another look at it. And I guess you have to do what you have to do, but it's interesting to know. And this is normal procedure, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Casey? No, actually, I was going to say, why don't you just call Diggler, but I guess designing around these pipes is a lot smarter than having to deal with them when you get there. So
Yeah, and with dig alert, you don't have a depth, so you really don't know what the depth of the pipe is. Really, the only way to make sure you're not going to hit it is with a pothole where you can actually uncover it and find it.
got it. So then we need a motion to deny the
I
bids.
I think
second. He made the motion, I
Oh, sorry.
second. Yeah.
Okay, motion is second. Any more discussion? The roll call, please.
Director Holcomb and Roberts are absent. Director Johnson,
Aye.
Director Balch,
I
Director Van Wingerden.
Yes.
Motion carries 302.
Then we got item number 7F, consider cap funding update. For information, Bob.
Yeah, if you recall, I had this on the on the agenda last 2 weeks ago. And the issue that I wanted to make you aware of was that we were in discussions with the state revolving fund, with the state who's managing the state revolving fund agreement. And there were some issues regarding the language that they were proposing for the agreement. And we've come to a point in which we agree with the language, and we've analyzed the cost of the language to us in the future, given certain scenarios, and we've determined that it's still a better deal than going with the federal program, the WIFIA program. So at this point, we're moving forward. We still have a few other things that need to be resolved with the state, but I think we're on track to have an agreement shortly in which we would have access to the grants and loans associated with that program. The other thing that has changed on this table from last week was we met with the Prop 1 IRWM group today, and they're looking to have invoices submitted by the end of this month. So that $650,000 that's available for planning will be applied for at the end of this month. So with that, it's just an update. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to attempt to answer them.
And what was the interest on the state funding versus
2.5.
And the feds were how much?
4.5.
Okay, well,
Just to remind me, what's our total grant that we've gotten approved for the cap?
I believe it's at 28,000. I think now. 28. I'm sorry, 28 million. 28,000.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and that's like, what percentage? Not 50?
It's around 50%. I think depending on, we have the.
And that's grants, that's not.
That's grants, yeah. We
Okay.
have the probable engineering costs coming up in a few weeks, and that's going to be used for the Title 16 grant. So that may go up a little bit, but it's somewhere between 28 and 30 million.
Okay, all right, thank you.
What's the SRF prior cost on that chart?
SRF prior costs.
Second from the bottom.
Yeah, so everything back to 2019, I think. So all expenses, so the preliminary design, the CEQA, all of those expenses will be covered by the SRF.
So there would be two SRF
No, it'd
agreements
be
in
the
place?
same SRF.
Oh,
but
okay.
It's just broken out in terms of the
Money
of
already
the
spent,
value,
basically.
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
okay. Then we go on, thank you, Bob. So we go on to item number 8, director's reports. 8A, administrative committee meeting, November 2nd, 2023. It was directors Holcomb and myself. Basically, we discussed the two bids that were received on the benefit and the compensation study proposals. And after further discussion, Bob and Norman are going to go back to the two bidders for additional information and with additional criteria. So, anything you want to add to that? Okay. Then we go on to item number 8B, CCWA board meeting, October 26, 2023. Shirley?
I had it marked with a.
You got your notes? Or you
Yeah, I have notes. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I put a tape on it, but the wrong page. Okay. Yeah, the Central Coast Water Authority meeting October 26th in Buellton. And we started in closed session, and there was nothing to report. And after some consent calendar things, and we went on to the water supply situation. And the big change in news there is they are not projecting a San Luis Reservoir spill. And at first they said for sure in November it's going to spill. And the reason for that is that they released more water into the San Francisco Bay because the salt water was coming in from the Golden Gate Bridge. And they had to release more than they thought they would to drive the salt water back. So that means that we don't lose our San Luis spill. And so now CCWA has 40,000 acre feet available and no capacity for water banking and no takers for any sales or to repay, water debt so far. And the next item was the Devil's Den pumping plant due to unplanned outage. In other words, a short and an explosion and a fire, and the associated agreements. And so we did we're now at 66 cubic feet per second. So and they said that they should get the 3 pumps running again in November. And I think Bob might have an update on that. I think that's the latest. And also we signed an agreement of indemnity, kind of backward looking to cover that. And the next item was adoption of Resolution 23-09, amending the CCWA rules and regulations governing the policies and procedures for the purchase of services, supplies, or equipment. So this was, it might be presented as a housekeeping item. I didn't think so because the basic bottom line for this. It's how the what approval that the management of CCWA needs from the board in order to purchase contracts and purchase items, or also enter into consultant agreements. So, and so what they did is, the one item was that they dropped the bidding requirement for entering into consulting agreements, which I think is pretty standard. As much as sometimes outside services, relegating things to outside services, sometimes it's becoming more of a problem. It's overused. They had an article in the LA Times about it, that, agencies are kind of moving themselves out of the position of responsibility and delegating it. But it also makes sense because, it has to do with expertise and quality and not just a contracting sort of a bid. And so what the second thing is kind of suggest, or what they wanted to change is that if a project is on the budget and they have a, like a thick budget for the CCWA, very, very well put together and organized and everything, but you go through iterations of that, 1, 2, 3 iterations, and I think what this says, it says that if it's on that budget, it doesn't need approval of the board, and and to present this proposal right at the last meeting, we're not meeting again until January, and the fact that the Central Coast Water Authority is a pass-through organization. In other words, we're a special district. If we spend money or, bill our customers, we have to answer to the public, both as a board member and also as staff. They do outreach. They address different groups. And where the CCWA is a pass-through company, they don't have any debt. They don't answer to really any public, kind of like the Department of Water Resources. You get the bill and you pay it. And so I'm kind of the opinion, even though I think they're excellently managed and captained by Ray Stokes and John Brady, but they're both going to be retiring soon. They're eligible maybe to retire now, so it's not really based on people. So I think they should be held on a tighter leash. And so if you present a board with this, a budget that's 2.5 inches thick, and then just automatically anything goes. But okay, so they had 1 point on that. They said, well, if it's a contract, the contract is required to be signed by the board. It can't be signed by the executive director. And I'm really? That seems kind of fuzzy to me. So the whole thing seemed kind of fuzzy to me, kind of up in the air. Well, it could be this, it could be that. And I'm very tentative at this point for our district to try to stay as local as possible, because we have no control over many of these other things. And that's been the case in the past, including contracts, Can we change this term or that term? No, this is the way it is. We got to do it. We all have to be together. So we really don't have much control there. And it is, primarily the state water allegations are primarily, the big majority is to Santa Maria as well. So, but anyway, the end result of that is that the board voted yes. I voted no. They didn't have a problem with it, but I did, and I hope the best will come out. But I propose that they bring it back. Let's discuss it and think of all what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? And but anyway, I went through. So see, DWR calendar year 224 statement of charges rebill. Here's an example of a pass through. We CCWA, Central Coast Water Authority, owes another $2.2 million to the Department of Water Resources, and Carpinteria's portion of that is $54,729. So I guess that's not too bad. And also the investment report, the LAIF is returning. I'm not sure if it's the yield or the rate, but it's 3.5. It's probably the yield, and all together is 5.13%. And then also they're shifting money to money market and T-bills, and that's at 5.22% return. So that's good. That's some good news. And let's see, the state water contractors report. They're still, the main thing is the voluntary agreements of the Delta, and they're working on that, and trying to find a resolution to that. And, the other thing I didn't say, regarding the Devil's Den pumping plant shut down, we still don't have the forensic report on that, on the fire what caused it, and although they did it, but we haven't seen it yet. We may not see it, so I don't know, but but it is getting up and running again. And January 25th, 2024 is the next meeting. And that's a summary of the meeting.
Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you.
Just curious, why won't we see that report on the cause of the fire?
Why? We don't know. I think it's with the DWR, Department of Water Resources.
Okay.
And this is, kind of how things work.
I understand. All right, thank you. Then we got number 9, General Manager's Report, none. Item number 10, there are no closed session items today. And then item 11, consider dates and items for the agenda for the Carpinteria Valley Water District Board meeting of November 29, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. Carpinteria City Hall, 5775 Carpinteria Avenue, Carpinteria, California. And we are hereby adjourned. Thank you. Maybe we should just do it with the three of us going. No, I'm just teasing. No,
Recording stopped.
I'll lose my best press street. I'll burn the Paris.